Yes, sir.
I can ask the question, what is deterministic tree complexity? It is the number of queries to the black box needed. I should say queries to the black box for computing F. Obviously, I want the best possible algorithm, but I am looking at the cost for worst possible input. There are to the power n inputs, and I'm looking for the worst possible. So you should be able to give me the answer on every possible input. That is the important. And if you think about it, once you have taken out these addition and everything, then your computation will look like a tree. You will ask some input bit, let's say xi1, then there can be two possibilities. I will tell you, oh, it is 0 or 1. Depending on that, you might ask same bit or a different. Notice that xi2 and xi3 might be same. I don't know, but will depend on the kind of algorithm. And similarly, this will keep going. And that's why this is called deterministic tree complexity. And we checked that this seems to be pretty high for most of the functions. Specifically, what is the deterministic tree complexity of OR? N. Because we saw that even if we miss out reading one input bit, we cannot answer our, we cannot compute OR on the input bits, because it might happen that the bit which we have not queried might be the only one bit in the input. And then we have, this is the important part. This is one way of saying. So again, one of the main reason why we thought about this model was so that we can put lower bounds on time complexity, or saying that some function is hard for the computer. Intuitively, think of it this: someone tells you that you have a list of n elements, or let's say list of n names. Remember, the list is not sorted. There is no structure in the list. This is just some arbitrary list of n names. There is no structure in the list. If such a list is given, and let's say I ask you to find a particular name. Let's say we want to figure out whether Vatsal's name is there. If that is the case, in the worst case, how many names do you have to look at the list before you can say that you are sure that whether Vatsal's name is there in the list or not there?
Entire list.
Sorry?
Entire list.
Entire list, right? This is very, very clear that you have to look at all n elements. Right? If you don't look at all n elements, then you cannot answer whether Vatsal's name is there or not, because whatever name you have not seen, that might be Vatsal. And if you think about it, this is exactly the OR problem. By looking at a name, you know whether it is Vatsal or not. So let's say if the name is Vatsal, I will put a 1 there. If the name is not Vatsal, I will put a 0. Then my input in this example is basically a string of 0, 1 to the, and I am searching for Vatsal's name. That means I'm searching for a 1 in this. Right? That means any computer which is searching in a list of n, you would say that, oh, classically on a computer, it should definitely take order n time, because you have to look at all names. And this exact intuition is formalized using this model of deterministic tree. because this is one of the most basic things where your cost will go, where your time will go. If you are trying to accomplish this task on a computer, you have to look at n. You have to look at all n indices. And if you have to look at n indices, whatever you do with those indices is a material. But since you are looking at n indices and looking at every index will take some constant time. It might be 1 millisecond. It might be 0.0000000000001 millisecond. I don't care, but some constant time. So if you want to look at n entries, it has to take order of n time. And this, once you say d of OR is n, you have formally proved that any computer, any classical computer which gives the correct answer will have to spend order of n time if you want to search in a list. Obviously, the list has to be unstructured. If it was sorted, then obviously you can do that, correct? If it was sorted, then how much time will you need?
Login time.
Log, right? So this is the motivation in some sense of defining this quantity deterministic tree complexity. In the case of exactly this model of computation, it was helpful, but not very helpful. What we are going to see today is that this model can be extended even when we are talking about randomized computation, even when we're talking about quantum computation. And then this method, this query complexity method is very, very strong. It gives us lower bounds, which are not so obvious. For d of OR being n, this is almost obvious to you. You can say, oh, why did we need to prove it? Why did we need to make a model for it? But you will see, we will use the same strategy or similar strategies to give lower bounds on other models of complexity. And this is something which is the topic for this week and next. Now, coming back to one midsem question, since all of you were kind of stuck with that question, let me talk about it. D of F composed with G. Right? Let's talk about this composition. Okay. First, intuitively, what do you think this quantity should be? In terms of, okay, let's say you take 10 seconds to compute F and you take 20 seconds to compute G. How much time will you take to compute F composed with G? Okay, so yeah, so this makes it slightly more difficult. But if you think about now deterministic tree complexity, think about it this way. For computing F, let's say you need to look at 10 inputs. And for computing G, you want to look at 20 inputs. And now, remember F composed with G? What was that? It was some function like this. Right? That you are doing F of G of some inputs. Correct. So if you wanted to look at 10 bits of F for computing F, and if you wanted to look at 20 bits of G to compute G, then for computing F composed with G, how many bits do you need to look at?
200 bits. So this
Right.
was like intuitive, but I mean, I was not sure if it was that formal. I mean,
Right. So this is essentially, the intuition is essentially the proof that D of F composed with G is less than D of F multiplied by D of G.
Yes, the upper bound was easier. I think the lower bound was a bit, I did not get the lower bound. Yeah.
Correct. So upper bound in these composition questions are easy because every time how would you think of making an algorithm for F composed? The strategy would be, okay, I have an algorithm for F. I start running an algorithm for F. At any point, the algorithm asks Xi. Then what will I do? I will solve the corresponding
G.
Yeah,
G
I will.
for G, X,
Yes, I
I
will
comma
cause the
1
GI.
to X,
Yeah,
I comma M.
very nice. I will solve this problem, right? How am I denoting it here? Yeah, I have switched between the first and second letter, but you understand, right? The ith block of input, I will calculate G on the ith bit of correct, and this will show that D of F composed with G is more than DF times G.
So each input bit of F is an output of G. Right?
Yes. So whenever I have to look at an input bit of F, I have to replace that by the entire deterministic tree of G. Right? So if F was, let's say, 2 levels, now this will become a tree in itself. This will become a tree in itself. This will become a tree itself. And obviously, what will be the depth of this bigger tree? This will be the depth of the smaller tree multiplied by the depth of the tree with which I have replaced every bit. Correct?
Yes. And the intuition is also there for the lower bound as well, because we need around, we do need DF bits to the input of F to compute F. And for each bit, we need to have DG bits of DG bit DG inputs. So the lower bound would intuitively be DF times DG, but it's not that formal, I guess.
Correct, exactly. So it turns out that this, what you said, that is the intuition that, it seems like, how can you do better? But this is not robust because someone might say, oh, probably, I will compute half the G for something, and it might help on some half the G on some other block or something, right? I have F,
Okay.
G1, G2, GM, I'm computing this. And then someone said, oh, probably I will not compute the entire thing. I will compute half of this, something like that. And yes, you might say, oh, doesn't seem likely that you might be able to do it. But, there are a lot of Fs, lot of Gs. There might be different kinds of functions. And it might happen that this is not exactly. And actually, for one of the models, which we are going to talk about today, the composition question is still open. We still don't know whether this, so this is going to be the randomized model. Instead of DF, we are going to talk about RF, and we don't know whether this is true or not. This is a big, big open question. You solve it and you will get a paper in a very, very place. But anyway, let's stick to deterministic. For deterministic, we know. We want to show now this. Now remember what we did for the upper bound? We took the algorithm for F, we took the algorithm for G, and then we composed these two algorithms, correct? Since we wanted to upper bound D of F composed with G, we took the upper bound technique of F, upper bound technique of G, and we said that we will mix them together. Correct? This is what we did here. This was the intuition. Take the algorithm of F, right? For the lower bound case, it's going to be the same thing. In the lower bound case, I have to take the lower bound technique of F, lower bound technique of G, and then mix. Correct? But in this case, since we want a tight bound, my lower bound technique should not be weak. We saw two lower bound techniques, right? One was the, what were the two techniques?
Degree.
Degree and adversary, correct?
Yes.
But degree will not work here, right? Because what if I show that degree composes, that will only show that df composed with g is more than degree f multiplied by degree of g. But this degree f multiplied by degree of g and df multiplied by dg, they are not comparable. They are not comparable in the sense that they might not be equal. I know df times dg is more than degree f degree g. They might not be equal. If I take the polynomial for f and polynomial for g, and kind of, everywhere wherever I needed the bit of g, I put the entire polynomial of g, I will get that degree of f composed with g is more than degree of f degree of g. So I will get all this inequality. But what about this? I can't say they are equal, right? Because df is not equal to degree of. The lower bound technique is not tight. That means we have to take the adversary method technique. We know adversary method technique was tight. If d of f is equal to d, then there exists an adversary strategy where whatever d adaptive queries you push at me, I can give it in such a way so that the algorithm's answer is not determined. Sounds good?
It should be -1 times the d, right?
Sorry?
Matlab, if d of f is d, then the number of queries that I can answer such that the answer is uncertain would be d of f -1, right?
D -1. Yeah. So yeah, let's not worry about these small constants, right? So that's it. Constants, we are always worried about the asymptotic things, right?
But here we have to prove equality, so it mattered, I guess. The problem.
So yeah, you can yeah, you can say that,
I'm just saying that here we had to prove equality, so if we miss out that -1, then things can go above or below it. So that's what I'm saying.
no, but you can make it more precise. You can say that, yeah, okay, yeah. So what will happen is, now you give me an algorithm, right? I have to make an adversary strategy, right?
Yes.
So I have to make an adversary strategy of this much, correct?
Yes.
Right. So what I will do is, whenever the algorithm, so you are given an algorithm or you're given a set of adaptive queries, whenever you ask something here, I will answer it in such a way so that G's answer is not fixed. Okay?
So that G's answer is not
fixed. And that I can do up to DG many things, right? Up to DG -1. So they will get fixed once I am doing DG many queries. That only, right?
Yes.
Right. And then if I have to, if I have done DG -1 queries here, and now DGth query comes to this particular G, I will assign it in such a way so that the gate above that, its value is not fixed.
So that it corresponds to some, it corresponds to some input which we would create for an adversary of f.
Exactly.
Right? So it would match in such a way.
Exactly. Right. So then you just, and this is the same strategy for AND-OR tree. Even for any depth of AND-OR tree, you can say that you will need order, and the adversary strategy would be that, you just fix it such a way so that you start going, moving towards the top, and you try to make sure, you try your best not to fix the value of it. If the value of this gate has to be fixed, then you move up and make sure that the value of this gate is fixed, and so on. And then by induction, you will be able to show an adversary strategy of this many.
So, sir, let's say there exists only a single input of G such that all DG queries are required for that input. There exists only a single input.
Okay.
Let's say for our function
Actually,
also.
there would exist two inputs because up to DG minus 1, I can make the answer to be anything, right? So I can basically change one bit and make the answer plus 1 or minus 1 both. So there would exist two inputs. So I mean, this was one important thing to that we can create it minus 1 or plus 1 both.
Both. Yes.
Okay, so let's say there are only two inputs. So there can be like at most two individual values
So
for
take
the
or.
first. Yeah.
Okay. So
So
G is or.
yeah, at the first level, there can be. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah,
yes,
understood. Yeah.
yes. So you can formalize it more. If you want to read about it, you can read it in Aurora and Barak also. There they just talk about AND and OR tree. Okay, but this can be formalized. It's the same thing which we can do for this F compose with G. Okay, the idea remains the same at every level. As I said, you try to make sure that the nearest gate, while moving to the father, to the parent, to the ancestor, the nearest gate which need not be fixed, we will not fix it. That's the simple adversary step. And then you will get this bound. Because again, you have to fix everything. You have to kind of, this should go with DG, this should go with DG, and then only the last one, when it is DG minus 1, still the value is not fixed. Correct? So then you will get this. Okay. And it is a hard argument. This was the hardest question on the paper, according to me. So it's don't worry if I was there instead of you and was trying to solve it in 2 hours, I would not have managed. That is fine. The purpose of that question was, and the understanding is that every time when you want to give lower bounds, they are harder as compared to upper bounds, especially in the combination. Even for this question, which is open, R of F composed with G is not equal to RF times RG. The open direction is this. Other way, we kind of, with some small factors, we know that R of F composed with G is less than R of F times R. There has to be a log n factor, but the small factors, I wouldn't worry about that. Some kind of error amplification, but yeah. Most of the time, the other direction is obvious. The upper bound is obvious. The lower bound is the high. So upper bound and lower bound, this you are fine with, right? When I say what is the upper bound, what is the lower bound?
I have a doubt that how can we make sure that the output of the G functions is a bad example for function F? Because G can be anything, right? G function can be any Boolean function.
Right, but you remember what is the adversary gives you? Even after DG minus 1 queries, I can fix the last bit so that the value can be anything, 1 or minus
1. Okay, yeah. Okay. In that way, we will manipulate it to be the bad example for function F.
What? Exactly. So whatever my adversary wanted to fix this, that is what I can fix by fixing the last.
Yes, okay.
Okay, good. This takes care of DF. And now we have slightly more intuition about DF. Let's take the stakes higher. We will look at this query complexity, right? These are called, I call it tree complexity, but a better word probably is query complexity. We will look at query complexity when our algorithms can be strong. In particular, when my algorithm is allowed to be a randomized algorithm, we will discuss what it means. That means it is allowed to toss coins. I will go more formally on that. And even if my computer is going to be a quantum, even then we can talk about this query model. Okay, and I will describe it in very slight detail. Randomized, we will go in detail, but most of you are not familiar with quantum computing. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So we will. I will not. You don't have to learn anything about quantum. Okay? So that is how we will go about this. How many people are familiar with randomized algorithms?
A little bit.
Okay.
Just the basic introduction, I guess.
Okay. Just the basic introduction is good enough. That's good. Okay. Let's worry about the randomized model to start. What is a randomized algorithm? Let's not worry about the query complexity. We will come to the query complexity later. First, what is the randomized algorithm? Idea is that generally, whatever algorithms you have seen, let's say if I want to compute f of x, your input is x and your output is, let's say, a of x. But then when is the algorithm A computing f? If a of x is equal to f of x for all x. Correct? I've read it formally, but this is the most obvious thing, right? What does it mean that an algorithm computes f? The final answer is equal to the function. Any doubts about this? Doubts about this?
No, sir.
No.
Right? So this is clear, right? Yeah. So this is the deterministic model. And for that, we have seen the deterministic tree complexity. But generally, this constraint is very difficult for the computers. Generally, in real life, we are very happy if we get the answer only some number of times. We don't want it to be with high probability. If we get an answer, we are happy. What does it mean? Let's try to formalize it. Let's look at the randomized case. What is the input? What is the right? My input is obviously x. I want to calculate f of x. So input x is there, but also think of as a random string r as also some inputs. What is a random string? Let's say you will toss coins. My algorithm might require 10 coin tosses. So then I will toss my coin 10 times. This will give me 0, 1, 1, 0, some string of length 10. Now think of your input as x comma r. It is x as an input, it is r as an input, and then your algorithm will output ax. Right? That means if r was of length k, then for a particular x, for a fixed x, how many x comma r are there?
Into the power r.
2 to the power?
Sorry, k.
2 to the power k. Correct? Because there are the number of r's possible is 2 to the power. And for every one of them, I might potentially get different. No, okay, there are only 2 possible answers. So they might have different. Some of them will give me answer 1, some of them will give me answer 0. Correct? When will we say that our algorithm is successful? We will say that our algorithm computes f if this is equal to f of x for most of the r's. Okay. Sounds good? Let's make it more formal. We are talking about randomized algorithms. So an algorithm A, a randomized algorithm, we give it the name A, computes F if and only if for fx is equal to 1, if the input x is such that fx is equal to 1, A of x comma r should be equal to 1 with probability more than 2 by 3. This value of 2 by 3 we will discuss later. Let's just assume this is some number which is bigger than r. Okay, if you like 3 by 4 more, you can put 3 by 4 there. I don't care. Let's start with 2 by 4. For fx is equal to 0, my probability ax comma r is equal to 1 should be greater than, 0 should be equal to, greater than equal to 2. If this happens, then I say that my randomized algorithm A computes F. What is a randomized algorithm? No, it does not just have the usual input X, but we also provide it with a random string R, and then it is the usual deterministic. After I have provided it R, then it will do exact same things as some deterministic algorithm whose input is large. It has X as well as. Right? Now, once you see this definition, the first thing to ask is, okay, since you are not asking, let me ask you, what is this probability over?
Over all possibilities of R.
Exactly. And this is very, very important. There are 2 to the power k choices. Again, k is a parameter, it will depend on the algorithm. But over all possible choices of R, 2 to the power k choices, the 2 by 3 fraction of it should give you the correct answer. Correct? So on these many R's, I should get the correct answer. This is what this statement is saying. And I'm emphasizing it because many a time people get confused and they calculate this probability over X. And that is not correct. The probability is not over X. It is important that for every possible input, now when I say input, I mean X coming from 0, 1 to the n, not obviously R. But for every input, algorithm should work with high probability. Okay, this is an important distinction to make. You should remember this. The probabilities over R, not on X. The algorithm should succeed for every possible X. And let me give you an example of this simple thing. Let's say whether you want to check whether a number is prime or not. Okay, do I need to describe this problem? As a computational problem, this is fine, right? I give you a number, its binary representation, let's say, and you want to say whether it is prime or not. The problem is clear, right? Very, very famous problem. Now, if the probability was over X, if this constraint was the wrong constraint, then can you come up with a stupid algorithm which works, which satisfies this this condition?
One which answers no, because prime numbers are not too much in number.
Exactly. It is very, very easy to satisfy this condition. You know, your algorithm will just always answer no, because we know that the number of primes are much, much, much lesser than number of points. So then probability over X, this quantity greater than equal to 2 by 3 is going to happen with very, very high. This will happen with, actually 1 minus 1 by log n types probability, much closer to 2. But this is not a valid randomized algorithm. Okay, so this algorithm is not a valid algorithm for us, precisely because this probability is not over x, it should be over. Is this point clear? Do I need to explain it more? Yes, no? Should I move ahead? Okay. Let's take one more example. Okay. This will make things more clearer. We will construct a randomizer. Right. What about if you want to construct a randomized algorithm to compute OR? What would it look like? Again, the problem is, think of it this way. You have n bits. You want to find if one of them is 1 or not. What do you think is the most natural way to find it out?
Look at some constant number of bits.
Right, and then check whether those bits have 1 or not, right? Randomly pick a subset and check if it has a 1. Sounds good?
Is it necessary to pick a subset or even one element singleton?
Yes. Yeah, so I can actually simplify this. Okay, what I can do is I can say that randomly pick an element. If it is 1, then I say that OR of x is 1, correct? If it is 0, then I would say repeat. Are both algorithms clear to you?
Yes.
Right. Now, it might seem like second algorithm is doing a bit of wastage, right? Because you pick an element x1, you know it is 0, but then after like third or fourth repetition, you might again pick x1. But you know x1 is already 0, so there is no need to pick 0. That's why it seems like that the top algorithm is better. It is more efficient, randomized algorithm for. But if you do the analysis, you will see that both of them are comparable. Both of them will require around 2n by 3 repetitions. And that we will see. Okay. So take my word for it that both of them will perform similar. So let's look at this algorithm, right? Which just picks a single element, checks if it is 1. If it is 1, then answer is 1. If it is not, then we repeat. Then we pick another random. So the algorithm is clear. Which algorithm we are talking about? And what is the algorithm? Any questions about what is the algorithm?
So do we pick an unpicked element or any element?
Any element. That's what I'm saying. If we picked an unpicked element, then it will be same as the previous element, right? The top element.
Yes.
But that is what I'm saying. Even if we pick a random element out of all n in the future iterations, the number of repetitions don't change much.
Okay.
That doesn't affect it. It seems like there is some repetition, right? It might happen that I pick x1, then x1, then x1. what will happen with such a small probability that we can ignore. That's another way. Okay. Sounds good. Now, so the algorithm is clear. Now, if my algorithm's answers 1, what does it mean? That the OR of X is
1.
1, right? We can be sure about it. Because we have seen a 1, that means definitely there is a 1 there. What we are interested now in is the probability that when we answer a 0. If we answer a 0, it might happen that the answer was actually 1. We did not see that element. And we want to bound the probability. We want to say that if we randomly pick, let's say, 2n by 3 elements with high probability, we will be able to see a 1. Now, the hardest case obviously is the case when I have only 1 and rest all of them are 0. Let's look at this case. If I pick a random element, what is the probability that it is 1?
Half.
No. Look at this.
1 by n.
1 by n. Correct? I can pick any n indices. The probability that I will pick this 1 is just 1 by n because it is 1 out of the n. Now I pick, let's say, an element randomly twice. What is the probability that I will pick this element? Or, okay, what is the probability that I will not pick this element?
You said that you would pick randomly the same element twice.
No. See, I'm just repeating this step. What is the step? Pick a random index, ask its square.
Yeah, so it would be 1 by n again that you choose it and n minus 1 by n that you don't choose it.
No. But that is for the second time. But my question now is, I have done this algorithm 2 times. I've repeated it 2 times. What is the probability that I have not seen 1?
1 minus 1 by n square is
1 minus 1 by n
square.
Square of what?
N,
Whole
I mean
square.
1. Okay. Whole square.
Right? Because in the first iteration, the probability that I did not see it in the first iteration is 1 minus 1 by n. And independently, the probability, so I should not be seeing 1 in either of the iterations, neither the first nor the second iteration, correct? So it's just a multiplication, right? If I have to fail after 2 iterations, that means I failed in the first iteration and I failed in the second iteration. The probability of failing in the first iteration was 1 minus 1 by n. The probability of failing in the second iteration was 1 minus 1 by n. So the probability that I failed in both the iterations is 1 minus 1 by n whole square. Precisely because they were independent events. The first time I picked an index, that was independent of how I picked this index set. Is that okay?
Yes.
Right. Now, if I do it k times, what is the probability of failure?
To the power k. No, the failure. Yes.
Sorry, hello? Yeah.
No, it's correct.
Right. Yeah. So it is 1 minus 1 by n to the power k. Is it okay?
Yes.
Right. Let me just write it. Repeating k times the same algorithm. Pick a random element, check whether it is 1. My failure probability is 1 minus 1 by n whole to the power k. And what do I want my failure probability to be? my failure probability should be less than
1/3.
less than 1 by 3, right? So what do we know about this expression? When does it become 1 by E?
And tends to infinity.
No.
When k equals and n is large.
Yes. So n, we can assume it to be large, right? Because we're talking about asymptotic complexity, correct? So as k tends to n, this becomes 1 by E. Correct? That means if I do this repetition order of n times, my failure probability will become less than 1. And in some sense, loosely, this was the reason why I did not care about 2 by 3. If my success probability was 1 by 3, instead of 1 by 3, let's say my failure probability was slightly more than 1 by 3, but less than half, let's say 1 by 2.5. My failure probability was 1 by 2.5. I can reduce it to 1 by 3 just by this repetition. We will talk about this in the next slide, but yeah, is this algorithm performance okay? That if I repeat order of n times, then my failure probability will become less than 1.
Yes, sir.
Is that okay? Yeah. Right. Now, this analysis was simpler because if you remember, our algorithm only had error on one side. What it means, if my algorithm answered 1, I was sure that my answer was 1. But if my algorithm answered 0, then I was not sure. So the algorithm had error only on one side. And then when I repeated it, I got a I got the correct answer with very, very high probability, and I had to repeat it this order of n times. But in general, my error could be on any side, correct? Because how have I defined the algorithm? Randomized algorithm. Ax is equal to fx with probability greater than 2 by 3. Right? Now, fx could be 0 or fx could be equal to 1. Whatever be fx, I'm only sure that my probability is more than 2 by 3. It's not like the OR algorithm. In this case, how will you reduce the error? Okay. Suppose I have an algorithm which gives me the correct answer with probability half plus 0.00001. This is not a randomized algorithm. My point is, after repeating it constant many more times, I can convert it into an algorithm A prime such that this is more than 2 by 3. My question to you is, what is A prime as compared to A? In case of OR, it was very, very simple. I repeated the algorithm. Anytime I got 1, I said my answer was 1. If I got 0 in all the repetitions, I said my answer is. But this strategy was okay because my algorithm had only one-sided error. Now, if my algorithm has error on both sides, which is the general definition of randomized algorithms, how can I reduce my error? Notice that the error here is this much, and I want to reduce it to 1 by 3. I have to repeat my algorithm, but then what should I do? If I repeat my algorithm, yeah.
So there is this thing from probability. So if we see that Ax equals to fx with probability, some greater than equal to some constant which is more than 1 by 2. So that means that if we look at, Ax equals to fx, if we'll see that distribution when it would be true or, when it would give correct answer or incorrect answer. So let us say fx equals to 1, then the probability distribution would be 1 with probability sum C and 0 with probability 1 minus C. So if we repeat the algorithm A some constant number of times, then we would get some K, we would get some K bit string, which would be 0 or 1. We know that each of them come from a uniform probability distribution of uniform some binomial distribution of C, where C, the correct probability 1 is C, and then 1 minus C is the incorrect probability, and then their mean should be closer to the actual value.
Very good. Very good.
Sample mean is very close to the mean.
Right. So the sample mean should be very close to the expected probability. But what does it mean in terms of this algorithm? My algorithm would be I repeat A L number of times. I will get 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1. What should I answer? Is fx 1 or is fx 0? How should I answer?
I think the majority should work, because when we get the expected value, we would shift it to the 0 or 1.
Exactly. The simple repetition technique is I take the algorithm, run it L many times, assume L to be odd. If I see more ones, then I will say my F is 1. If I see more zeros, then my answer is 0. Is the repetition strategy clear? Okay, let me first ask, is this first thing clear, that what we want to achieve? We wanted to achieve error reduction. What do I mean by reduction? Is that clear? Any questions? Raise your hands if error reduction is not clear. Okay. Now to reduce the error, we have said that majority will be our technique, which is that I repeat A, let's say 5 times. Again, how many times I repeat depends on what was this error and how much I reduce it to. But my claim is that it's constant. So you repeat it L many times. If I see once more, lot of ones, then I will say fx is 1. If I see lot of zeros, then I will say my answer is. This repetition strategy works because of a theorem in probability. Can someone tell me what that theorem is? I think Udit has very nicely described the content of that theorem.
Law of large numbers?
Yes. Yes. So let me just first tell you that this is the first idea. We will get better bounds because of Chernoff bound. It's a stronger version of law of large numbers. But let's see why law of large numbers should be up. Suppose I have a coin, right? And I toss it. It comes head with probability 0.50001, and it comes tail with probability 0.49999. Correct? Now, okay, let me simplify. I don't want you to make a lot of calculations. Let's say head, the coin is slightly biased, so it gives you head with probability 0.6 and tails with probability 0.4. If I toss the coin 1,000 times, how many times do you expect that I will see head?
Around 600.
Very good. Right? We'll see head around 600 times in expectation. This seems intuitive to you, correct? But law of large number is saying slightly stronger thing. It doesn't say, not just they say that in expectation we will see it 600 times. It will say that we will see the number of heads will be between 600 plus epsilon and 600 minus epsilon with very high. Okay. Am I making sense? All this is very, very intuitive. Law of large number just formalizes this. Sounds good? Questions? Now, when we have this success failure kind of coin tosses, and they are independent coin tosses, independent IIDs, then actually this probability, the dependence of that on epsilon is much better if we use Chernoff bounds. If you are not familiar with law of large number, just think of it as a stronger version of Chernoff bound. If your random variables are more structured, they have more properties. In this case, they are identical and distributed. Then they satisfy a stronger theorem. If it's Chernoff bound, the probability is actually very, very high. This is very, very, your number of heads will be between 600 minus epsilon, 600 plus epsilon, with very, very high. For us, what we need is that the number of heads should be more than how much? If I want to increase this probability to, let's say, 0.7, we want to say that, again, head is my algorithm is a success, tail says my algorithm is a failure, my success probability is 0.6, I want to change it to 0.7. What is my algorithm? I will repeat it 1,000 times. And if my number of heads or number of successes are more than what, then I will answer 1. I will answer the correct, I will give the correct answer. Number of heads should be more than
500.
5. Because that's the majority, right? And this will tell you that number of heads will be more than 500. Chernoff bound will tell you that number of heads will be more than 500 if you repeat some constant k times, L times, which only depends on this 0.6 and 0.7. More importantly, it does not depend on the input size. It does not depend on how big your algorithm is. Makes sense, right? By repeating some L times, L is a constant in terms of the input size, you can just increase your probability from 0.6 to 0.7. I'm not going to go into detail of this. If you're interested, look at Chernoff bound. This will give you the exact form of how this repetition is. But what it tells you is that this old 2/3, which I always talked about in the definition of randomized algorithms, that's essentially, not very important. I could take any other constant bigger than half. And I will only lose a factor of a constant. I'm interested in asymptotic complexity. So it doesn't matter. How do I play? Instead of 2/3, it could be 3/4, it could be 4/5. I only need to, instead of 2n times, I will have to repeat it 3n times or 4n times, but it's still order of it. I don't care. That's why this constant is not. So for the rest of the randomized discussion, let's fix it to 2/5. Let's fix this constant to 2. Okay. Is that fine? Any questions about what we discussed now? We figured out what a randomized algorithm was, and we figured out that the constant is not really very important. It could be any constant bigger than half. Let's fix it to 2. Sounds good? Questions? If you don't ask questions, then I have to ask questions, right? Now, in this randomized model, now we take a randomized algorithm in this deterministic tree model. How will it look like? What would it mean that I have a randomized algorithm in a deterministic tree? Remember, what was a deterministic tree model? xi1, then 0, 1.
So we have the R bits as internal nodes as well here.
Very nice. The only change that is going to happen is that at a particular node, I can ask, what is R1? Correct? Because that is part of our input. Right? Because now our entire input is not just X, but a random string of R2. So at any point of time, I can have a random bit. I can query a random bit and then ask whether it is 0 or 1. Looking at that random bit will not be charged anything. Right? Because the random bit is free. Okay. Now this actually can be simplified. There is an easier way to think about the randomized algorithm in the deterministic tree model. It's not true for general computational like circuit model or something, but the deterministic tree model, we can actually simplify what a randomized algorithm is. Right? So think of it this way. Suppose I just used one random bit in my algorithm. If it was 0, then I'd do xi1, xi2, xi3. Otherwise, here xj1, xj2, xj3. Is the right-hand side deterministic tree clear? There is only one random bit I'm querying. After that, my algorithm is determined.
So corresponding to one set of inputs R, we have one particular deterministic tree.
Very nice. Very nice. So actually, I can think of this this algorithm as saying that with half the probability, I will run the blue tree. And with half the probability, I will run the red. Do you agree with this?
Yes.
Right? It's the same thing. I can say that with half the probability, I'm running the left side tree. With half the probability, I'm running the right side. Because R is going to be 0 or 1 with probability half. So instead of making this tree where I have kept R's, I can say I can create a probability distribution over deterministic trees. And by applying induction, you can take it further. I had taken the first bit as random, but even if, so assume that, up to some level, there is no random bit. And then I get a random. Again, I can remove that random bit and create a probability distribution over deterministic trees. So by applying induction, I can show that a randomized algorithm in this case is same as a probability distribution over deterministic trees. Okay, so when you will open up one entire tree which might have different random coins, finally you will end up with saying, oh, with probability 1 by 100, run deterministic tree D1, with probability 1 by 200, run deterministic tree D2, with probability 1 by 2, run deterministic tree D100, and so on. You will get a probability distribution over it. And if my randomized algorithm is correct, that means for all X, again, remember, the algorithm should work correctly on every input. What does it mean that it works correctly on every input? The probability that my randomized algorithm A, t of x is equal to f of x is greater than 2 by 3. But what is this tree? This D is coming. This D is a deterministic tree coming from this distribution. And this different definition of randomized decision tree is very again, what we can think of randomized decision tree in two ways. We can say, as was kind of very nicely explained, that at some point we can query a randomized. That was one way of thinking of a randomized algorithm. But to make it simpler, we can also say that a randomized algorithm is nothing but a probability distribution over it. And then with high probability, we get the correct answer, where we are computing the probability over all deterministic trees, over my distribution of these. That means if I take an input x, half times probability that my answer is correct in the blue tree, plus what is the probability is correct, sorry, plus half times red tree x is correct. This should be more than 2 by 3. By the way, probability blue tree x is correct is a wrong thing to write, right? It is just half times indicator whether blue tree calculates x correctly. Because blue tree is a deterministic tree. There is no probability associated, right? Either it correctly computes your f on x or it doesn't. So that probability should be more. Questions about this new model? The equivalence between these two. I can think of it as querying random bits at the nodes of the deterministic tree, or I can think of the entire algorithm as a probability distribution over deterministic decisions. This was the randomized algorithm, randomized query model. Now, what should be the randomized query complexity for a function f? It should be minimum over all possible random algorithms which compute f, means this condition is true. Right? That on most of the deterministic trees, I'm getting the correct answer. Though when I say most, I mean with the probability distribution, right? It might happen that the distribution is not uniform. So whatever is the distribution, according to that, most of the deterministic trees are computing the value correctly. Then my A computes f. Look at all random algorithms with compute f. I find the maximum cost or maximum queries which A takes on x. Okay. Again, this is the query complexity of A, and I want to calculate the best query complexity. Now, what do I mean by queries AX? how many queries I do when X is the input? A is a random algorithm, right? It's a distribution over deterministic. So what does it mean? How many queries? In D1, I might be doing different number of queries on X as compared to number of queries in D2, as compared to number of queries in D3, in D4.
So the weighted sum according to the probability distribution.
Very good. One way you can define queries A comma X is the expected number of queries on X, where again expectation is over this distribution over the deterministic decision trees. That seems like the most natural definition. We will see tomorrow that even if we define it to be the worst case, that means max over D, max over X queries done on D for X. Again, obviously probability of D should be non-zero. Correct. Still, we can take queries to be the worst possible queries, the worst possible case, or we can take the expected. This quantity only changes by a constant. So generally in the literature, this is how they define randomized. They define the cost of a randomized decision. The cost of a randomized decision tree on X is the maximum number of queries on any X in any decision. It's the maximum depth of any decision tree used in it.
So queries AX will be independent of X.
No, queries AX will not be independent of X. Max X
yeah.
queries AX.
No,
so
you said right, the maximum over all X's.
Not queries AX. Sorry. Max over D. So here X is fixed. Yeah, my mistake.
Yeah.
And then there will be a max of X when we talk about the randomized query, which is this R2 by 3. The 2 by 3 is the same error which we talked. We know it doesn't matter. We can take it to be 3 by 4. We can take it to be 4 by 5, 4 by 6, whatever. Any constant. I know I have exceeded the time, but just one small thing. Again, we don't want to go deep into quantum model. What I wanted to tell is the small difference between randomized and quantum. Yeah, this is how we define randomized algorithm. Right? If I talk about quantum algorithm, by the properties of quantum algorithm, the randomness is inherent. In the end, you get the output in a quantum algorithm by measuring your states. And there you can have a randomness without even having R. So in that case, it's just that you have a quantum algorithm, and in general, if you take any quantum algorithm, it will always have a probability of answering 1 also. That's just because of the inherent randomness in the quantum world. If you remember quantum mechanics, then we used to say that if we measure, sometimes you will get spin half, sometimes you will get spin minus half, sometimes you will get momentum as 1, some h, or sometimes you will get a momentum as 2h. So that there is this inherent randomness when we look at the output of a quantum. And then the probability is over that inherent randomness in the quantum. You don't need to have an external R to create randomness in the quantum. That's all you need to worry about in case of quantum. I will take quantum algorithm as a black box and then print results. Okay. This finishes the lecture. I understand that this kind